Hey everyone, and welcome to a panel with 3 playwrights from our latest project, Our Future Stories. I'm Hallfridur Thora Tryggvadottir, always called Halla, and I'm the artistic director of Scandinavian American Theater Company. And I've had the honor to work with these playwrights and to shape audio experiences about the pandemic and about the theater of our future. So now I give it to Ida Victoria Biering, our dramaturg and literary manager, who's gonna take it away and discuss, this beautiful Our Future Stories project.
Okay, thank you, Halla. As Halla mentioned, my name is Ida Victoria Biering. I am the dramaturg and literary manager at SATC. I am so thrilled to welcome all of you for this wonderful conversation about our future stories and about theater in the face of the pandemic. Our Future Stories is our most recent audio project. It featured 7 playwrights from all over the Scandinavian and Nordic region, in which each of them reflect on the pandemic and how it has and will impact the stories we tell on stage. Today we have 3 of those playwrights with us, and I would like to introduce them. We have Saaramaria from Finland. We have Eva from Iceland, and we have Camara from Norway. Today we'll be talking about their individual pieces for Our Future Stories and the future of theater in general. All of their pieces, as well as the 4 other pieces, are available to listen to for free on our website, which is satcnyc.org. So definitely go check that out if you haven't already. I'd like to start with each of you talking a little bit about your pieces and sort of explaining a little bit about the inspiration behind them. We obviously gave you a prompt to think about, but just, how you interpreted that prompt, what inspired you. And then after that, sort of building on, just give us a little bit of an introduction to each of the pieces that you wrote for Our Future Stories. If anyone would like to kick it off, you can go ahead. Otherwise,
okay.
Hey, how about we start?
It's like awkward of, yes, I'll do it. No, hi, yeah, Camara here. Well, first of all, I think it's difficult I had to pick up the piece again today and listen to it because I wrote it in December around Christmas time. I was writing it during Christmas. And 2021, you thought that 2020 was a long year, but 2021 has just been, it's been a journey. So I just really needed to rethink, am I still in that state of mind? And then I guess in many ways I was. Not that much have changed since Christmas. We're still in lockdown here. And my piece was called Pulmonic Ingressive, detailing the notion of the very Scandinavian notions of answering yes and no questions while you inhale, and it's kind of non-committed. It's something that foreigners very often make a pause around because they think it must mean something extraordinary for us to say just those 2 words while we're inhaling, but it's also some way of just not engaging that much in the conversation. And I think 2020 for me was, of course, very much affected by the global pandemic, but you also had the murder of George Floyd in the US that kind of made these ripple effects throughout the entire world of Black Lives Matters. And my work has always been focused on intersectionality, decolonization, and anti-racism here in a very Scandinavian context. And it was quite difficult for me to figure out a way to deal with that topic of racism, of violence, of seeing how the pandemic so unfairly has hit different demographics of society based on income and migration, and to stay involved, because I think I just hit this kind of low point where I was just like drowning in my own apathy. Like I had no fight left in me. So it made me quite like pissed off to try to find some kind of energy to write this text for the US that was just like dominating absolutely everything in every media frame. But I think I kind of, at least I tried to take that exhaustion and then just like distill it into the text. So I'm basically just like trying to confront myself with my own non-committance. But it was a very interesting task to get to do, because I'm so in a Norwegian context. Every time we talk about racism in Scandinavia, it kind of gets dismissed as imported problem from the US. We don't have that here. This is an American problem, and now you're appropriating American culture. So to try to write something about racism from a Norwegian perspective for the US seemed very strange to me, because I'm always trying to kind of like separate us from the American discussion to not have it dismissed. So it was, at least for me artistically, a very interesting writing journey, very provocative and very exhausting and fun. It was fun as well.
I can definitely see. Yeah, I think that's really interesting, the thing that you bring up, because in Denmark also, I feel like I experienced this thing constantly of like, you know, I think it's great that what happened in the US over the summer last year inspired so many people to really take up that conversation and you know, across the world, and really talk about, you know, what does racism mean. But like, I do feel like sometimes like the conversation, it kind of gets sort of brought over without necessarily thinking about, okay, the individual context. And in not doing that, a lot of the time, I feel like the discourse revolves around, well, because it's not like that for us here, that means we don't have it. And of course, that's completely untrue. In the Scandinavian regions and Scandinavian countries, and certainly in my native Denmark. But then how do you then, as an artist, write about something primarily for an international audience, but for a primarily American audience who need to kind of understand and identify themselves and see themselves in the text, while at the same time, you know, showing a real representation, or at least trying to give an idea of like, well, this is that topic, but in a very different context with its own meaning entirely. And I think that's a really important question that we keep on grappling with, keep on interrogating, and keep on discussing. What about Eva? If you could tell us a little bit about your piece.
Yes. I was very interested in, or I wanted to research more, like, I was like a bit overcome by, there was this one way, like all you heard in the media about the pandemic, in the first months of it, were like, okay, it will be so good for us and we will learn so much from it, and everyone was so like positive, and you always heard like from like a bit wealthy people like having it, like working at home, and all the advertisements were like, okay, you can order this in. And so I wanted to, like, it's so interesting that we all have the same subject to talk about. Like, I wanted to try to just talk to all kinds of people about this same situation we are living in. So I went with my phone and rang on doorbells to talk to people. I also found it was like quite nice way because everyone is just in their homes to just go and talk to people. And it was really interesting how people, like almost everybody was really willing to talk, because people are very often lonely and not been like, if they have someone, they've been talking to that person for maybe many months. And yeah, I was also interested in checking, you know, if I would get various like or different responses, which then turned out to be like from Icelanders or like immigrants or people who had like lived there for a shorter while. This is also interesting because in Iceland it was a lot about like almost or like totally nationalistic atmosphere. Like we learned a lot of new words, but people who don't speak Icelandic were just like not getting all the, like the doctors were singing old Icelandic songs to get people to like travel inside their houses, like completely joke, which is like really difficult for a lot of people to understand. So yeah, I just wanted to go out, speak to people, which was fun. But I also connect to this, like it was also hard somehow. I think this year has been also really difficult to be creative because we're all like, I don't know, like I feel like I'm like deep in water somehow, like just refreshing the news on. So yeah, something a bit larger somehow.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing to think about, because it seems obvious to say that we're all in the same situation and all in the same boat, but I think so rarely do we actually get to say, because everybody's experiences of life is different, you know, like depending on where we live, depending on our education, relationships, our family, what we've experienced in our personal lives as well as in our work life. Our experiences of life vary, even if we have things in common. So I think that, and you know, there can be something going on in the world that we're talking about, but we're not necessarily all experiencing that very thing. And I think that is what's really interesting, and what I think your piece really captures is, okay, we're all experiencing this exact thing, and it has all affected us. Of course, you know, some people have been more affected by than others. I don't think that there's anyone who doesn't know a person who has lost someone to the pandemic, or, you know, several people, which is very, very sad. But like, obviously that varies, but we can, I think, pretty definitively say that there was a period of time where everyone was at home because of the pandemic and they were just in their houses. And to think about that as, it's not just a shared experience, it's literally the experience for everyone, and to go, just to grab your phone and go and talk to some people and see, well, what is that like? And putting it together, I think is really interesting. Saaramaria.
Yeah, well, that kind of, is it a similar experience or different experience for everybody, was something that I was kind of thinking about while starting the process. And something that kind of struck me was that I saw a lot of those posts that, oh, when I was watching these pandemic films, I never thought it would be me in pajamas inside my house. But then it hasn't been that kind of for the majority of the people in the world. It's still like, yeah, you can be in your house, but the kind of level of safety and security you feel in your house is so different depending how privileged you are. And I have a lot of friends who have become really close to me, like my family members who have come to Finland as asylum seekers. And their experience during the pandemic was something that really stopped me and kind of forced me to write about it, because they had been really hopeful in the fall because we got a new government that was a leftist government who wanted to end their 5-year wait, and kind of that was something that was spoken about before the elections. So there was hope, and bam, then comes the pandemic. and all of a sudden the spotlight moves. If there ever was a spotlight, a small light that there was, a small spark of hope that there was, that moved again. And then it was kind of those experiences of not only is there a pandemic, not only is there a virus that kind of threatens you, but your kind of already hopeless situation has been pushed to worse and nobody is talking about your situation anymore. And then kind of how can we narrate stories this year and to acknowledge that those groups that were already discriminated against are discriminated against worse, and there has been kind of this element of control that has been justified by the pandemic. I had friends that I visited in a detention center and I had to meet him outside in the winter without winter because of security of pandemic. And then it's like you can't rip off somebody's dignity in the kind of name of security and kind of safety, and that kind of topics were something that I wanted to touch upon.
Yeah, and I think that that is incredibly important, because while I think it's so important to point out that, you know, security and safety is a very relative term, and it means, you know, totally different things depending on who you are and what your experience of life is. And it's, I think that there has been a lot of talk about, you know, the world just kind of came to a stop. The world just kind of stopped, and, you know, the streets were empty, and we saw all of these, certainly in New York, you know, all the streets were empty and it was like a ghost town and all of that. But for a lot of people, and certainly, you know, trying to make your way in a new country, and you're trying to be granted asylum status, or you're trying to immigrate somewhere, life goes on, right? Like the world didn't stop for them, and if anything, it made an already really untenable situation even more untenable and even worse. And, you know, the really dark and sad truth is that in many ways, the pandemic has also been and can be used as a kind of a reason for these already very difficult processes to become even more difficult. And I think that that's important to keep in mind, is that, you know, there is a side of the pandemic, I feel like certainly early pandemic, where I was like, oh, we're all going to be home, and, you know, we'll just have weeks, and we're going to be at home, and we're going to have, you know, lots of time and just watch all the Netflix and stuff. But like for some people, it couldn't be more different. And to shed light on that and say, hey, you know, it's in many ways the pandemic made this even worse, and we can't. Yes, the pandemic is still at the forefront of our minds, and we live in it every day. And even though we're sort of starting to come back to normal, you know, we can't forget to keep talking about the things that are really important to talk about. So I think that that's beautiful. Which brings me, because you mentioned, you know, the kinds of stories, Saaramaria, that we tell, and you know, how we can approach that in the future. And so that actually brings me to something else that I wanted to ask you about, which is in the past year, because you know, you're all writers, and I know you experiment kind of in different mediums, but you all you know, spend your time with stories in different mediums. And this was a very new medium for us as a theater company to experiment in, doing an all audio piece. And I know that, you know, for you as playwrights or as writers, you know, the pandemic has influenced the way that you experiment. What I wanted to know was, has your kind of central idea behind storytelling and how you tell stories and what you think, what stories are to you, has that changed in the past year because of the pandemic? And if so, how has it changed, do you think? Maybe we could go back to the top of the order with Camara.
Oh, that's a tricky question. Yeah. I don't know. I think that, well, as a writer, I have had to adapt a bit. That that I did this project, and then I did another sound piece project for the fjords of Norway. So I wrote this also monologue for this speaker called Decibel, which is like the biggest portable horn in the world. It's like 2.5 tons. And then they move it along the mountain sides of the fjords of Norway and then play it for villages. So I did like a commissioned piece for that as well, which was very daunting because the sound was so big that you really had to space out your words, which was, and I'm a ranter. Like my text is like no spaces and just text. So that was at least new for me working with these mediums. But I think that as, like, of course, I've been writing this year, but I'm also a member of the Norwegian Arts Council, and I'm head of the performance art section. So last year I read 2,000 applications from artists within the Corona pandemic, which I think was like the most interesting to see was the adaptability of the different mediums and the different artists, but also this very interesting notion of that, you know, Norway is a place with a lot of nature. And then what people could be at home, or you could take a walk. So people have been like hiking their asses off, like in the mountains and in the woods, and people have been walking everywhere. And then all the artists kind of just like migrated to the forest, just like, I will do my dance performance here. I will do my concert here. I will read my book or text here. And then when somebody comes walking, I will just be there, surprise attack with art, which I thought was in the beginning hilarious, but then I also started walking in nature, kept seeing dancers everywhere, and I was just like, come on, let me enjoy a tree. Do I need this much art in my life? But I did, so I was very grateful for it, but it was kind of like this when you couldn't seek it out, the art kind of found a way to seek you out. Like I've seen like performances, troops coming to my backyard, just popping up doing children's theater. And I don't have kids, so I'm like, shut up, I'm trying to write. Yeah, so it's been like beautiful to see this kind of like movement within the art sector of just like brutal necessity of survival. That's why people have done it, to be able to create and to be able to get funding, but also this notion of just like some of the art just coming closer to me than ever, because it just came wherever I was. I couldn't like buy a ticket, go to the show, sit down, wear my dress, put on lipstick, be ready for like blow me away. It would just like pop up from out of a tree. So I think that's been like a very interesting kind of like immersive experience for Norwegians, that just like it's art has merged with nature in a way over here, which I think is beautiful and also quite overwhelming. Yeah, if that answers your question.
No, that really answers my question. And I really love this idea of art merging with nature, but then also art, you know, I feel like, you know, we're all kind of different in terms of how we like to engage with our art and how we like to engage with shows and plays. And I'm kind of in the same way, in the sense that I really like to, you know, this notion of choosing your art, and like when you engage in it, and like when you know, when you go to, and like the whole experience of theater going is something that is really important to me in ways that I didn't realize was actually that important to me until the pandemic happened, and then that was kind of robbed from you, you know. And it's obviously, you know, as artists, I think that we love to immerse ourselves in it, but we also love to experience it and choose that experience. And you know, when we're not able to do that, when we're not able to have the theater going experience, when we're not able to choose it, you know, as much as it's great to see people being creative in other ways, and like you want to, you know, be immersed in it, you also want a little bit, you know, for yourself. You also want to make the active choice. And I think that is really, that's really funny, but also really important to think about, you know, like it's the theater going experience is something that I think is important to a lot of people. And certainly, you know, if you're at home, for me personally, you know, Zoom theater is not the same as that, but you know, that's something we can get to a little bit later. Eva, what about you? How has storytelling changed for you, if it has?
I don't Well, I'm thinking a lot about, as I mentioned before, like whose story is it? Like, who is telling the story? Who has power over the narrative? And why we are telling certain stories? But also, it came to my mind that there's something, you know, I feel like we've all experienced together somehow, like a tent falling out of our like life. Like we have created this civil life together somehow, like how we all want our life values and like our ways of, you know, flying and travel and, you know, consuming and things like that. And now we've all experienced just like a cut down, like some extreme changes that can happen. And probably, like people say, like things will keep on. There will be probably other pandemics, and I think there's this feeling. I don't know if I can phrase it, but you know, I think we're like close to some more like magma in ourselves. You know, we can't like I'm more like vulnerable for something that isn't real somehow. I think, I don't know, I want more connection and I want more like real things. You know, we all know that I have been like with my performance groups, like researching like man-made world. And now it's like we are here somehow, I don't know, like at the skeleton somehow of our world.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
yeah.
we had this interesting situation for the first time, I think, in history, that performance art and theater was prohibited, like by law. There was this new kind of like sign, like theater is prohibited. So I was hoping to see more of theater, like you were mentioning, all of these applications, like more immersive and like I think it is like so blooming states also, if people have the energy and yeah, the roots to be creative, to see how like what does this all this restrictions do to the medium, but probably because of this law, and you know, a lot of people were just out of job, and so still I haven't seen like as much of like this immersive pieces as I was hoping for it to come out of this situation.
So for you, it's almost the different. You were hoping that it would kind of generate, you know, a new kind of age in theater making, and you know, all of these new kind of organic pieces, and you know, finding new way to connect with people and that kind of.
Yeah. Would like be offered like a theater into like somebody's house and one-on-one and through phone calls and things like that. But yeah, maybe also these hardcore pandemics are not the most, I don't know, at least we haven't seen it yet in Iceland.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's interesting because I can definitely follow that, in the sense that like you know, not only is it kind of like you're hoping for a return to normal, but in the face of, you know, not being able to connect really at all, or very, very limited with other people in the past year and a bit, you know, you would almost hope for that we would go not just back to normal, but like more like in the opposite direction, you know, that it's like, okay, like now more than ever, we don't take for granted these moments of human connection through art, and like we're able to, you know, have much more of a one-on-one experience because we haven't been able to have that for so long. Just being with other human beings is something, you know, that you would kind of hope for. I think a big part of that, certainly from my personal experience, has to do with this notion of trying to, because I don't know about you all, but after being cooped up in my apartment and not really seeing anyone except for Zoom, or at least like very, very limited and very distanced, I feel like I have to kind of relearn how to be around other people, just socially, let alone in a kind of, you know, more like structured, creative, like artistic way. And so I wonder to what degree that plays into the creating of new theater and creating of pieces where, you know, we're not just learning how to make theater in the face of this pandemic, but we're also learning how to be with each other. And if anything, you know, theater is a human experience, it's a human connection. So we're still trying to figure out, okay, how do I engage with other people in a way that isn't infused by the notion of, you know, trying to stay away from them? How can I connect, you know, through that? And so I wonder if, you know, maybe that time will come where we're like, okay, now we figured out all the social norms again. Now we're going to get to the connection. Saaramaria.
Yeah, my thoughts are in like that I, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, saw a lot of positive potential in online theater and like connecting online with different artistic projects, partially because a lot of my friends and especially colleagues that I have with before are all spread around the world. So then the idea that I can do a piece which is online piece, then I can share with those friends who wouldn't be able to come to the play I have in Helsinki, for example. So then that is something beautiful. And then I have had an amazing kind of connection to a lot of my friends in India and in Brazil, for example. But obviously it's not the same emotional connection and the kind of feedback you get if you have a live performance. So you kind of lose out a lot. But especially because I've been really kind of even depressed with the way our social media and internet has been polarized, I kind of hope for future, like once theater has kind of taken a grip of online platforms, maybe we can use what we have learned and that potential to kind of bring that empathy, that kind of empathy that theater can bring, to kind of bring those polarized parts together, because it's quite kind of threatening even and really kind of scary to see how people are creating their own tribes online and can't even feel empathy to those who think differently. So obviously theater, hopefully once we can gather in person and have theater, like the presence shows, but obviously also maybe that kind of online platforms and different kind of immersive and different shows that connect, maybe combines audio pieces and video streaming to live performances. Maybe that's something that we can still have in the future.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because that was actually going to be one of my next questions, because I feel like there's a lot of conversation, and I don't know that anybody has found the answer yet, but there's a lot of conversation about, you know, Zoom theater, which is a new term that we never thought that we'd have to learn. Zoom theater, or you know, let's say virtual theater, or you know, something, you know, theater as experienced on a virtual platform, let's say. I've heard, you know, different things from different people in terms of like, you know, it's you know, now I feel like we've kind of just started to see all of the opportunities that Zoom theater can bring, and you know, there's a lot that you can do with it. You can do a lot of cinematic things that you can't do, or that you can do live on stage, but in a very different way, right? So I would like to get sort of all of your opinions of, you know, now that we've experienced and we've really explored this platform because we've had to, how much of this idea of streaming theater and how much of this idea of Zoom theater, you know, are you hoping that we take with us? Or do you feel like, you know, once we can get back to gathering and theater, you know, let's leave the streaming behind and let's, you know, just focus on theater, you know, in person? Where do you kind of fall on that spectrum? in terms of whether we should keep it or not?
I think one reason to keep it is that it's a way to reach new audiences. As a consumer, I have even realized for myself that there's a lot of things that I was reluctant to experience when they were like live performances. For example, stand-up. Then I was like, if I go to a play or stand-up, I usually chose play. But now, because there were so many kind of online options and the prices were lower and was just a click away, I realized that I became a fan of many stand-up comedians in Finland, so they gained me as an audience because of the pandemic. So I believe that is maybe a chance to reach especially kind of lower income audiences, because theater, especially in Finland, is quite pricey. So it might kind of then restrict a lot of people outside, but then hopefully like maybe at least a combination or option that you can also see it online might reach those audiences that might not be able to afford or might not be interested before kind of experience it online.
Yeah, I think we should, I'm looking forward to a form of a hybrid. I think that there is a lot that we have learned the past year. And I think that theater, in the sense that theater exists, it's very able-centric. It's very classist, both with the prices and the accessibility of a lot of the spaces where theater is performed. I think that we have now an opportunity to reach new audiences, but also to include audiences that wanted to be there all along but couldn't. And I think also one of the beautiful things of being like in the moment when you are there is, of course, the collective experiences of being there. But like here we have the National Theatre, and I'm a house playwright at the National Theatre now in Oslo, and we're supposed to be a national theatre, but Norway is a really long country and we are only in Oslo. And sometimes if a performance is good enough, you go on tour with the Riksteater. So I think that the possibility of opening up our spaces, I think we have a lot to learn from that. But also, I'm not that interested in recorded theater, but I do love that. I've done some Zoom theater and some of these, like this live streaming. That's something that you still have to commit to it at 8 o'clock and it's finished by 9:30 and you're seeing it while others are seeing it and you're texting your friends about it, or something that still has this this kind of linear TV in it, that Buffy the Vampire Slayer would only be on Tuesdays. So you had to see it on Tuesdays. If not, you missed it. And I think that I do miss some of these like collective experiences that television used to have, but we don't anymore because you can stream it whenever. So I think that if theater is going to continue being this like digitally immersive, I kind of want to keep this bråttom, also that we're in a hurry. You have to see it. You have to get home by 8 to see it. Or you can try again tomorrow. I think that we should, that's at least that's what I'm in many ways interested in, to try to get this emergency, because theater is emergent in a way. And if we're going to do it online, I would like to keep that kind of emergency, a state of emergency going, the adrenaline of it. If not, I would work in film. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just the thing, right? Is and I know certainly over here that's been a huge conversation. Is okay, Zoom theater, you know, a huge conversation in terms of copyright, and also, you know, for over here in the U.S., you know, there's the SAG-AFTRA union, and there's the Actors Equity union. You know, there are other obviously theater unions, but for actors, you know, it's like there's the stage union, and there's also the, you know, the filmed content union. And there was, you know, they have really had to figure out, okay, like where between, like, is it film? Is it theater? Is it somewhere in between? And like they've had to kind of figure out between themselves a separate deal, and you know, some, you know, there's so much more details that goes into that than what I'm describing here, but just to give you a sense of the fact that, like, you know, this idea of a hybrid and this idea of having to figure out, you know, what kind of experience is the audience actually having has also been, has affected the industry beyond just obviously shutting it down, but also, having to figure out, okay, we've had to create this new medium basically, and what does that mean for rights holders, and how does that mean for compensation and for actors and playwrights, etc. So that's a huge thing, and I have to say I agree with you. I love this idea of having an experience that you can't choose, right? Or that you can choose, but like in terms of when, because everything for us is so convenient, in the streaming age. And we are, as the consumer, we're very much able to take the initiative, and everything is sort of the ball is very much in our court in terms of when we want to have the experiences that we want to have. And I think that it's important to still have that choice, in terms of like what you engage in and when. But I love this idea of I think it's called slow TV, like you were saying about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or every Wednesday at 2 p.m. This is coming to mind, like Twin Peaks is on, and you can only watch it then, right? And you're gonna have to wait until next week to see another episode, or you're gonna have to wait till next week to see another performance. And so I think that it would be good for us to kind of infuse a little bit of that, 1995 era kind of thing back into our lives as we kind of figure out the experiences that we want to have. Eva, what's your take on this whole Zoom theater thing?
Well, I'm pretty much really anti-Zoom. There has been also a lot of streaming in Iceland, but mostly recorded things, and I don't know. For me, it has been just time to like read more books and watch more films, and because I think there's something like not working, but I also agree that this is a time really to like both look at like we have like this is an opportunity to reach new audiences, and like really think about what stories we are telling, to whom and how, and things like that. And I think we could more like ask like how does this project or story, what does it need? I mean, like this project, it was 5 minutes long audio. I think audio is a lot more interesting than Zoom. And I have done a few live stream like reading, like poetry reading. There has been not so much, at least that I know of, this like stream theater which is not recorded, but there has been some readings, and there is something really strange about like being there just talking to the computer. I don't know, there's something lacking just for me, which you can create in so many other ways. Like I said before, that now is the time to research. I think like a blooming time to research more, like what is theater, like why have we been so focused on stage and audiences and things like that. I mean, we can like use the time to get more off-centered in both our techniques and like storytelling. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I completely also sympathize with what you're saying about, yes, Zoom has and FaceTime and, all of these devices and apps have given us the opportunity to connect with people that maybe we haven't connected with in a long time, just because of the ease of it, and certainly also gives us access to maybe plays or performances or stories that we wouldn't necessarily have access to. And certainly people who haven't felt welcome in the theater physically before are now able to experience these stories, because it can also be a dangerous thing depending on who you are and how you express yourself and your identity to come into theater, because it can be elitist, it can be classist, and so this notion of well, it is in many ways kind of a very dated. There are some dated traditions that I definitely agree is taking the time to really investigate, okay, like what are the things that have not been working and are excluding people rather than inviting them in, because that is really what I also think that theater should be, is an invitation to an experience. And for so long there are groups or people who haven't felt that invitation. So how can we change that? And also how can we open up their minds to not just this idea of theater 1800s white male playwright, proscenium stage, I mean, and while it's good to experience those things, I think that Shakespeare, for instance, I don't know that there ever come a time where we'll stop doing Shakespeare, fortunately, unfortunately, depending on what you think. I think there's still some richness to be found from those older plays, but we also need to have the new. We also need to be also interrogating that. We also need to be coming up with new ways of telling stories, engaging new writers from different backgrounds and from all over the world, all in pursuit of this invitation to people. And certainly, again, Zoom has very much, I think, saturated our lives. And I think that a lot of us can, even though the accessibility is a great and wonderful thing, could all do with a little bit more kind of organic, in real time experiences with people. I definitely agree with that. And I think that it's, yeah, sorry go ahead.
If it wasn't for Zoom, this meeting would never happen. None of us would have been flown to New York to have a conversation for 1.5 hours and then flown back. And we shouldn't have been because of climate. But I think that in that sense, especially when it comes to recruiting new voices or trying to have like these conversations with new demographics about art, I think for me, I would never call this horrible pandemic a blessing in any way, but what it did was free up some time or possibility for me through Zoom. Like I get contacted a lot by that high school teacher that really sees something in their students and think that, oh, this playwright should come and have a talk, just like 2 hours of talking about theater and writing with my kids in Sykkylven, which is like 9 hours by train from where I live. And I never have the possibility to go for like a small amount of money, travel for 2 days to talk to 2 hours to just a high school class. So I declined like, I think at least 50 or 70 requests like that a year, because there's just never any time. Then it would have to be a tour, and I don't tour anymore. But during Zoom, I could suddenly just like, okay, 1.5 hours, and just like pop into the bedrooms of 16-year-olds, just talking to them about writing, and to have like a writing workshop in their school day, because they were just so hungry to do anything, because everybody was being homeschooled. And I thought that opportunity and that attentive audience that I found in those kids, I would never have had the time or the possibility to make those travels all over this like long country with very few people. So I think in that sense, like those, I did it very intensively for 3 weeks. And in those 3 weeks, I just loved Zoom. I thought Zoom was the greatest experience, like the greatest invention of all time. And I did it in St. Croix, and I did it in Ghana, and I did it in Sweden and Finland. And I could do it like all over Europe and Scandinavia. I could talk to these small like groups of youth about playwriting, which you never get to do. So then, at least for those weeks, I was really in love with Zoom. And then, you start having like actual work meetings at Zoom, and then you just want to throw the computer out the window. But that's a different thing.
I'm sick of looking at my own face in Zoom and everybody
like
else.
Narcissus, just like looking in the screen, just quietly drowning in the pool of the
Yeah.
face.
Of the 2D mirror reflection. Yeah, no, and I think, and that's a really important point, and that's actually something I would love to hear from you also, Saaramaria and Eva. You know, what were some of the things that you know, unexpected opportunities that you feel like you received, you know, that you wouldn't have been able to do if the pandemic hadn't happened. And again, you know, obviously stressing that you know, you would never call it a blessing, but also acknowledging that, you know, there are certain things that, you know, if this hadn't happened, then we wouldn't have been able to do that, because, you know, the geographical barriers and there's only 24 hours in a day, you know, those are all barriers to us, you know, not being able to do the things that we want to do, that we get asked to do. But were there any opportunities or maybe some inspirations for your work that you had that you wouldn't have had otherwise?
I had some opportunities like coming to this project, but also got to do a Zoom poetry gig, which was also exciting because then obviously it's the same that it was also saying that you are just talking like this to your own computer and you don't know if anybody's listening, but still it had something amazing and cool to kind of experience that even though I'm locked here, the art doesn't die and there's still kind of something happening and we can still connect and I can try out my poetry and try out maybe something new. But also, as I said earlier, I kind of found this new connection with my friends in India, and that was something kind of really inspiring in a way and kind of put myself into a focus, because a lot of my friends, they had it so much worse off, like they couldn't even go to a forest for a walk that I could do. But my friend, for example, said that he was sitting outside a hospital while his dad is inside and he's writing a movie treatment, and that kind of image was so kind of powerful in a way that he just loved his doing and he wouldn't give up his writing no matter what. And it kind of shut up my complaining and I got back to writing, and in a way got back to the basic why I started to write in the first place, why I love it, and kind of just wanting to get to my craft and focus making myself a better writer, which inspires me, and kind of putting everything else aside. So that was something that was really something positive that I
That's really, really inspiring. Eva, what about you?
Yeah, I think yeah, it has been like, yeah, a lot of this Zoom meetings, and I found it was really beautiful. Like something changed. Like I was meeting the same people. Like I have another hat as a like artistic director of the performance festival in Reykjavik, and we had a lot of like this crisis meeting before. What should we do? Like we were going to throw the festival like until like a few weeks, 2 weeks before it was supposed to start. Then it was prohibited to have any kind of performance art. So it was so nice to meet all these people in Zoom, and everyone was just like, how are you doing, and stay safe and things like that. That it was something really beautiful about how we connect in this. And I don't know, I guess I was quite amazed at how all the systems suddenly, you know, because we're in arts and which is always in crisis, like in Iceland, and all of a sudden there was like this a lot of new funds, like because of COVID. Now you can apply for do. So I actually got money to for a publication, which I wouldn't have. It's always like that, like in the crisis 2008, like many artists was thriving like never before, because now everybody is like looking straight at the eye, like, okay, there's crisis. So yeah, this was what came to me. Otherwise, just like more time to just to be and to read and to slow down. And I think also that I hope that we will come out of it like maybe just a little bit less productive, you know, like more just to like do less and take more time in writing our projects and creating our projects. And I'm hoping, at least it's this feeling now in Reykjavik, and I don't know if it's just gonna like poof, like get blown away and everyone get into the same rhythm just as before, but hopefully not. I hope not. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's very interesting. You know, it's in addition to this kind of new, you know, certainly professional opportunities, but then also opportunities to connect with people you haven't connected with in a long while, like Saaramaria was saying. But then also the opportunity to check in with yourself, you know, and to, like you said, you know, kind of slow down. And I think that at least over here, there was this kind of narrative of you know, now that we're all at home and have more time, like, what are you going to do? Are you going to be, you know, are you finally going to finish that book that you've been meaning to finish? Are you going to finally finish that Netflix series you've been meaning to finish? You know, all of that. While at the same time, I think running concurrently with that is also this idea not to put too much pressure on yourself as an artist to, you know, do all of these amazing things while you are in the quarantine. And I think finding a balance of both of those things is gonna become really important, I think, going forward. We are, I think, almost out of time, but I do want us to be able to get to at least maybe one, maybe two questions that we got from our lovely audience or from our lovely followers on social media. We put out a call to see if anybody had any questions that they wanted you to answer during the panel. And we got a few. A lot of the ones that we got, I feel like we've already addressed and kind of talked about. So hopefully those who asked those questions will find answers in the kind of the main part of the panel. But something I think that we haven't maybe talked about is going back to each of our Future Stories pieces. One viewer asked, did you write your piece with a performer in mind? And I know some of you also, you know, you perform your own pieces, or you also work with actors and that kind of thing. And so I'd be interested to hear what the decision or like what the conversation behind that was like, and especially since it was an audio medium, you know, are there different considerations that you make when figuring out, you know, a performer for that? Or, you know, does that not really cross your mind? Do you kind of just write the text organically and then you say, okay, you know, whoever performs this, or like, this is for this person's voice and their interpretation of the text? I'd love to hear from each of you.
I usually don't think the performer, even when I'm writing a play, I kind of focus on the text only and the characters. So I kind of had the same thing in this piece. So I wasn't thinking so much how it is performed. And also because the time was quite limited, then in that sense, I didn't let myself even to think too much what could be done with it, because I know the quarantine was worse in Finland and everything was.
Okay, sorry, I don't know if you can hear us, but I think your connection dropped out for a little bit. Maybe we'll go to someone else for now, and then see if we can maybe Saaramaria can join us back in a little while. Camara, do you want to maybe pick up on the question?
I can. I think that's because I used to be a performance artist, and I used to perform all my texts myself, and I very seldomly do that now. I also have quite a bit of stage fright, so I don't really enjoy it. That's why I love writing. But I think that I've had, in my career, I think I've written nine plays now. And I think I've only written 2 characters that can be played by white people. And they're not specifically written for white people, but they can be performed by white people, which is, of course, always a big problem within the Norwegian theater institutions because they are very, very white. But I've always been like very involved with casting and very involved in like that process of what stories am I telling, and who gets to tell those stories, and what does it mean to put this body on this stage. And I think that I kind of burned myself on some of these, like I did pieces in the pandemic, and then the theaters that I was working with was like super relieved because they were like, oh, but then we can just use a white actor because it's just voice. Which kind of like, I got a lot of my pieces back that were about like anti-racism, that was about the exhaustion of the anti-racism movement, of always being like performatively angry or trying to be revolutionary in your sorrow. And then I got all these pieces back with just like white actors performing them, and like the heads of the theaters being like, but you can't, like, we would never blackface, but we can't black voice. Like, isn't that's it, a voice is a voice. Yeah. And I could feel like I hadn't really, I don't think, since I never worked with audio before, I think it was such a, I really needed to wrap my head around if I found that okay or not. And I was in the process of understanding if I was okay with it or not, and like realizing I am not okay with this. I'm going to be difficult. When you guys called to commission this piece, and you were like, do you have any thoughts about actors? And then I felt like, I'll just do it myself. For now, this time, I'll just do it myself. And then I really have to think about like audio casting in the future. And I've had the same with my books that I've written that are done as like audio books. I've also decided now to I recorded some of my books as audiobooks during the pandemic. And then it was also very important for me to not to let publishing house have an actor do it, because I was unsure. So I did it myself. But I am trying to learn how to let go and let other people make decisions, which is my favorite part about theater, the immersive process of different voices meeting each other. And that's why I want to write and somebody else directs and somebody else is on stage. But I think we're not quite there yet in the Nordic countries about representation and inclusion in the arts sector, that we have a lot to learn. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't really know how you can differentiate, how you can say like, oh yeah, we'd never put an actor of color, a white person, portraying an actor, a character of color on stage, but a voice is fine. I'm like, no, that's not. If anything, I mean, you're talking about a literal voice, like a voice is identity also, right? Like you can't, I don't see how those two things can possibly be separate. And so in that case, yeah, we have I think a long way to go in terms of that conversation. And that is a conversation, I mean, it still has some way to go, but I feel like in the US, it's also very different. There's a huge amount of diversity in the US, and is a much bigger country, obviously, with its own history. But I feel like that is kind of a little bit, that's a little bit more progressed in a sense, because it's like there is this understanding that no, like you can't cast a white actor in placement of a performer of color or a character of color. Like if you're talking about experience, if you're talking about somebody giving voice to that experience, whether you see them visually or not, you have to keep that intact. Or even if of course, like, you want to give the freedom for different artists to kind of infuse their own vision to it, if the author very specifically says, this is how I envision it, I feel like you have to be sensitive to that. So I understand the kind of like, okay, you don't want to, you're trying to let go a little bit, but I do think that it's obviously it's very important to stick to that. And I can't imagine how many exhausting conversations you've had trying to make that point. So
I've become quite comfortable.
Yes,
being difficult.
And I think I would highly suggest that you stay that way, because I think only through being difficult is where we get somewhere. I see that Saaramaria has joined us back. Would you like to kind of pick up on just to finish what you were saying about your piece and the performer in mind?
Yeah, maybe just like I kind of usually leave it for the director, and just to kind of want to trust that the director to do the right choices. But definitely I agree with what Camara was saying, that it's so important that there's right people on stage as well.
Absolutely. Okay, I'll pass it on to
discussions to go forward.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I think either my video or your video cut out again, but again, it's Zoom. I'm gonna pass it on to Eva and your piece. And, obviously I think yours is very specific in the sense that you went around with your phone and you were interviewing people, but was there a version of the piece where you thought, oh, maybe this will be a character, or the character will be somebody other than myself doing this? Or was it always kind of you wanted to put yourself in it?
Yeah, I have never actually written a piece like with characters and performers. Just this either kind of documentary theater, like where people are performing text as themselves, and also this immersive, or like what we called it, extended live performances, where we would write text that people would come in and like kind of live them, like go through assignments for a specific amount of time. So I have actually no experience of like thinking about a performer or for a character.
I love that though. I think that's a, because then it's a very, all of your work that it has your point of view. I mean, every work has the author's point of view, but it's very much kind of, I do very much enjoy, as a spectator and as a viewer of theater, I do love to kind of see when the author is literally putting themselves inside of the work, and it's obviously not just flowing from their pen, but it's also very much this idea of the author, and maybe not the author as performer is not the right kind of term, but the notion of that I think is very interesting. I think we are just about out of time. I do want to end on a hopefully with a final question, which is obviously I think that restrictions right now are kind of differ a little bit country to country, but my understanding is overall, at least here in the US, overall, we're starting to open back up society in most places. Obviously there are countries like, for example, India, where the pandemic is really, really bad and really raging, and it's really taking its toll there. But in our individual countries, things I think are starting to open back up. I know in New York, theaters are also coming back very soon. So I wanted to ask each of you, now that it feels like there is a coming back kind of thing, however slow. What do you hope for most in your, or what are you inspired by and want to explore in your own work as part of the storytelling that we were talking about, what you hope will happen in the theater? Taking that to your own work, what are you hoping to explore more of after this past year, and now that things are starting to open back up?
I have got a lot of joy from comedies this year, and I have really needed to laugh. So that is something that I want to kind of have in my writing as well. I kind of have dig so deep into really tough topics because they have been in my head but I really want to laugh the next year. And I think that is going to be in my writing as well. I want to be bringing some joy and laughter to the stages as well.
I think we could all use some laughter for sure. And some shared laughter as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Camara, what about you?
Well, I think the both like the global international discussion, but also like the Scandinavian national discussion regarding racism and anti-racism has, I don't know if it's gone to another level, but it's become quite louder this past year. And I've been very fascinated about how like the public discussion regarding anti-racism has been very notional that you have the anti-racist and you have the other side, and there's very few nuances and very little understanding that within the anti-racist movement we bicker a lot, we fight a lot, we don't agree, but when you have to present yourself to like the Norwegian media, you have to be like this united front, which I'm very fascinated about, like every movement that becomes monolithic in a way. So I'm writing this play about like a polyphonic work for 3 women of color for the National Theatre that will hopefully premiere in October. That's called They Must Birth Us or Fuck Us to Love Us, which is kind of like an exploration of the different voices between like the intimacy, like the fucked up intimacy of anti-racism and how you relate to each other, which is in many ways a comedy. So I'm hoping that some of the critiques that have been happening in the media, that I can at least try to bring forward other voices and opinions than my own, because I can be very monologue-y and I'm trying to write polyphonically now. I think that's my goal. If I've become very tired of my own voice in this pandemic, living alone. So I'm trying to include some others. Yeah.
Yep, I definitely feel that. And I hope I get to see that somehow, whether in person or in Zoom. I hope that lots of people get to see it somehow, if all goes well. Eva, what about you in your work? What are you hoping for? Oh, maybe the connection issues have come back to haunt us a little bit.
It's a very nice breeze.
Yeah. It is a very nice breeze. Maybe hold for a second and just to see if it comes back. Otherwise, maybe we will sign off and continue the conversation. Hopefully more in person, where there isn't such a thing as Wi-Fi issues. Okay, I think with this, maybe we will take it as a sign that Zoom has decided that it's time for this conversation to end. But hopefully we can continue, and hopefully our wonderful audience will continue having conversations between themselves and also on our social media pages and elsewhere in their networks about the future of theater. But I want to thank each of you, and obviously also extend my thanks virtually and elsewhere to Eva for participating in this conversation and for coming together, which rightfully would not have happened probably without Zoom. So thank you for that. Thank you for taking the time. And thank you to everyone who tuned in and stuck with us to the end despite the technological issues. But hopefully those are about to be a thing of the past along with this pandemic. So thank you. Thank you to Origin Theatre Company for partnering with us on the European Month of Culture for this panel. And thank you to our audience, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.